You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
Right up Meridian, baby.
What a night, and really what a week of WNBA basketball we just had, as you are now listening to the Right Up Meridian podcast. And if you didn't know, now you know. The Fever are heading on to the second round, the Final Four of the WNBA for the first time since 2015 after winning their series 2-1 over the Atlanta Dream. I'm Zion Brown here on the Back Home Network. Of course, all of our Back Home Network podcasts are brought to you by Homefield Apparel. Visit homefieldapparel.com and use code HOME23 for 15% off. And of course, they have the best college apparel there is right now. I just saw as I'm recording this on late Friday morning, just released some new IU gear ahead of the big matchup coming up against Illinois tomorrow night. So go ahead and check that out at homefieldapparel.com. Once again, using code HOME23. But let's get just right into this Fever series. And we can just start right away at game 3. The Fever come away with the 87-85 victory in Atlanta, scoring the last 7 points unanswered on a 7-0 run to win that ball game after it's a big 3 hit by Ryan Howard to make it an 85-80 game with about a little bit over 2 minutes left to go. And it looked like Atlanta was going to take it, right? Although the Fever had fought so hard, they were never able to take the lead in the second half until there were 7 seconds left. And Aaliyah Boston got the assist from Odyssey Sims to put the layup up and put Indiana ahead for good. But it just looked like the Fever were going to just keep fighting and not ever be able to really take that lead and win the game, right? They would get within 2, they would tie the game, but then Atlanta would come right back and untie the game or go on a little run to go up by 5 or 7 again. But this Fever team kept pushing and they got the win. And look, hand up, I was wrong, right? When me and Tony talked last week, he said dream in 3. He thought that series was going to 3 games. I said dream in 2. So we were both wrong in a sense, but at least he knew it was going back to a game 3. And if you would have told me the Fever were going to win this series, I wouldn't have thought that it was going to look the way it did. And so kudos to the Fever for the way that they played and were able to overcome the fact that Aaliyah Boston averaged just 12 points a game, which isn't a bad scoring mark. But I said it on last week's podcast. I was like, hey, for the Fever to win a playoff series, right, it's going to be Aaliyah Boston has to be, a 15, somewhere between that 15 to 20 point range, somewhere where she's really in control of a lot of games offensively. And she was still a major factor in what the Fever did. Don't get me wrong, especially with her passing, high post play, and they're still running a lot of things through her and her screening as well. But I was under the impression that she was going to get buckets, right, for the Fever to win that series. And that just was not the case. And they didn't need her to, for the most part. So kudos to the Fever, kudos to them for even surviving, despite the fact that Aaliyah Boston averaged just 12.3 points per game. But you go to that game 1 and Aaliyah Boston gets in foul trouble. And those moments where she's on the bench, the Fever offense just struggled, which is, once again, just shows her value that it's so much beyond scoring. Right, even if she's not scoring a lot, her value was shown offensively just in her presence as a screener, as a passer, as a high post player. And that game 1, Indiana only scored 68 points, and it felt like they just could not score in several moments of that game. Defensively, they were okay, not great, not terrible either in that game. But you go back to that game 1 on Sunday, and it just was like, man, they just can't find buckets anywhere. And then you get to Tuesday, and it kind of looks like that same slugfest early, and then Indiana defensively just stepped it all the way up, made it really hard on Alicia Gray and Ryan Howard to score, made it so difficult on those two players. And the second half in particular, the Dream just ran out of options. They ran out of answers. And so the Fever got a 77-60 win there. And then once again, this game 3 was the opposite of those first 2 games where right away, I believe it was 29-27 after the first quarter, like right away, guns a-blazing, everybody's shooting the ball well, and everybody's coming out scoring. It cooled off a little bit toward the second half, but you could tell everybody was just so dialed in on both sides to win that game 3. And again, it's Kelsey Mitchell. I've shouted her praises the last 2 episodes. Let's make it 3 in a row. 24 points in this game 3, averaging 23 points a game in the 3 games of this series. She was just special. When you think about the bucket she had, I talked about when the Fever went down by 5, the bucket she had, just kind of scooting past Bree Jones and just getting that left-handed layup to go on the right side. And that layup helped get the lead back down for Atlanta. Huge, huge play by her. And then of course, the play where Aaliyah Boston took the lead for the Fever. Kelsey Mitchell on the ball screen was able to kind of get Bree Jones caught up. It was Bree Jones and Jordan Canada were getting caught up, which, by the way, Jordan Canada was tremendous in this game for Atlanta because offensively she had it going and defensively she was guarding Kelsey Mitchell very tightly in the second half. I said Kelsey Mitchell had 24. 19 of those points came in the first half. So only 5 in the second half for Kelsey Mitchell because Jordan Canada, a lot of times, wouldn't even let her get the ball. And I talked about how good Kelsey Mitchell is off the ball, just finding those angles to get open. And Jordan Canada was on it, right? Whether it was a back cut, whether it was coming off a dribble handoff, whatever, Canada was on that. And they really allowed Mitchell to get a lot of good shots off in that second half. But you get Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston in that ball screen, and all of a sudden, the hard screen set by Aaliyah Boston just kind of sends Jordan Canada to the ground. Bree Jones has to step up. Jordan Canada just gets caught in no man's land. The ball comes back out to Odyssey Sims, who realizes that Jordan Canada and Bree Jones are kind of in this miscommunication. Odyssey Sims, with her 8th assist of the game, throws it ahead to Aaliyah Boston for what ended up being the go-ahead and essentially the game-winning bucket for the Fever. So shout out to Odyssey Sims. 16 points, 8 assists in that game. No turnovers, right? The only mistake, I guess 2 mistakes, she missed the free throw that could have given the Fever a 3-point lead. She went 1 for 2 after the big Lexi Hole steal on the inbounds play. So that was kind of a mistake. And then I thought even before she got to the free throw line there, I think it was Kelsey Mitchell and Bree Turner were both ahead in the front court after Lexi Hole got the steal and they gave the ball back to Odyssey Sims. I thought Odyssey Sims should just thrown that ball up to one of them in the front court and let the time expire. Instead, she just kind of held it in the back court and got fouled. And it gave the Dream another chance, but the Fever defended yet another. They basically defended 3 straight inbounds perfectly, right? The first play, the Dream were trying to set a back screen to get Nas Hillman wide open for a layup. The Fever switch it well. The Dream have to call timeout. The next play, I'll get to this in a moment a little bit more. You see Lexi Hole steal the inbounds pass going in to Bree Jones. And then the third play, there was just nowhere to go. They had to throw it up to Bree Jones for a straightaway 3. You'll take that if you're the Fever any day. And so great job by the Fever. Lexi Hole, of course, guarding those 3 straight inbounds plays to perfection and ultimately getting the Fever the win in that huge game 3. And I just want to take this moment now to shout out Stephanie White. I said it 2 weeks ago, like, hey, I feel like some of the criticisms have been too harsh. I asked Tony about it last week, Tony East, and he just was like, I don't know how to judge what she's done or assess her season as a head coach, her first season back as a head coach from the Fever, because she hasn't had the team that she kind of signed up to coach. And I was like, yeah, I agree with that for the most part. To not have that team, to have this team where you're playing so many different players, I said it last week, 18 different players suited up in games for the Fever this year. 18 different players. And to go through that much turmoil, those many changes, the DeWanna Bonner situation, the injuries to Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, Ari McDonald's, Sydney Colson, all of those players who have gone down, Chloe Bibby now out with injury, Demiris Dantas, all these players who have gone down. And to battle through that, I tweeted it last night. All you can ask from a coach in this situation is to get her team to fight and not really give up on any given day. And Stephanie White has done that. This team continues to show up. Players who weren't even on the team a month or 2 ago are now playing in these huge minutes. You know, your Ariel Powers, your Odyssey Sims, your Shea Petties, players like that are showing up and giving it their all and adjusting to the game plan as it kind of continues to change based on the personnel. And I just think she's done a great job with this team, getting this team to the second round. And I'll go to the defensive point again. I talked about Alicia Gray and Ryan Howard. They scored decently well, but neither one of them at all in this series was able to really take control of this series whatsoever. And to me, that was extremely impressive. I mean, they were both held under 50% true shooting in this series. If you had told me that before the series, I wouldn't have believed you, right? Like Alicia Gray averaged 16, Ryan Howard a little over 15 points a game, but it wasn't efficient whatsoever. It was not an efficient scoring attack for this team. And so that's what impressed me the most with what this team was able to do in this series, is that they played so well defensively. They knew their coverages. They knew what they were doing at all times, at all moments. And it even goes back to the final play, or the second to last play, I guess, when Lexi Hole got the steal on the inbound. I love that ESPN got to show us a bit of those huddles with Carl Smesko in Atlanta and Stephanie White on Indiana. And Stephanie White, they're talking about, hey, they're going to try to get something, some sort of back screen. They're going to try to get Bree Jones a paint touch. And you see You see the coaches, you see Austin Kelly talking about it in the huddle, and then Stephanie White comes in near the end of that huddle, and she says, hey, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just a straight post entry into Bree Jones. And that's what it was. They set a little bit of a cross screen or a UCLA screen almost to try to get Bree Jones open. And Lexi Hull's guarding the corner, right? Of course, Aaliyah Boston's on Bree Jones, big on big. Lexi Hull's in the corner, and she sees it, and she's like, she basically knows that Ryan Howard, the inbounder there, is not looking to throw that ball into the corner. So Lexi Hull cheats off her player, comes in and gets the steal, and that is basically the ball game. That is great coaching by Stephanie White. It's a great play by Lexi Hull as well. Of course, we know what type of defender Hull has been for the Fever over the last couple of years. And the Fever are moving on. It is kind of miraculous to say and to think about, but this is the first playoff series win for this team since 2015 when Stephanie White was last the head coach of this team. And it's the first time that they are advancing in the playoffs without Tamika Catchings, right? I wrote about it a lot when I was covering this team on a day-to-day basis, how before Tamika Catchings got there, they never won anything, never won a playoff series, never made the playoffs. In the years after Tamika Catchings retired, they had failed to make the playoffs up until last year. Last year, they got swept. They hadn't won a playoff game without Tamika Catchings until the win on Tuesday night in Indiana, and they hadn't won a playoff series until Thursday night when they were able to beat the Dream in that thrilling 87-85 victory. So hat tip, kudos to the whole squad, Kelsey Mitchell, Stephanie White, everybody, Lexi Hull, I talked about making that huge play, Odyssey Sims, everybody who stepped up specifically on the defensive end and came to play. Obviously, 85 points. You would like to have a better defensive showing in Game 7, or Game 3, right? But these Game 3, these do-or-die games, as everybody knows, kind of takes the life of their own. And that's what happened in this game. It took its own life. It took a life of its own. And Odyssey Sims was kind of that player who you never expect to come up in a game like this to play as well as she did. 16 points and 8 assists. She was that player. And, of course, Kelsey Mitchell was the best player on the court. I think that was the difference. I guess you could argue Jordan Canada, as I talked about, might have been the best player, but I was really impressed still by Kelsey Mitchell with her 24 points. And the Fever are moving on to play the Las Vegas Aces. This series, I did predict correctly, but it was still a little different than I thought. I said Vegas in 2. I didn't think Seattle was going to steal a game, and Seattle almost won the series, right? Vegas blew them out in Game 1. Then in Game 2, it looked like another blowout. It looked like Vegas had it, right? It looked like they were advancing 2-0, just like I was predicted. And in that fourth quarter, Seattle goes on a huge run at home. They win the game by 3, forcing a Game 3 that Vegas won thanks to the tip-in putback by Jackie Young, the Indiana native from Princeton, of course, Notre Dame alum as well, to get the 74-73 win. And then Erica Wheeler comes down, former Fever player. She comes down, has a decent look at a 15-footer to take the lead right back for Seattle. It doesn't go. They get the offensive board. It comes back out, and they couldn't get a shut off. They had one more pass to Gabby Williams, who didn't get it off in time. Of course, that was the crazy. Everybody who saw that, the lights going off as the shot was in midair for the celebration for the Aces, that was odd to me. I was like, why did you not wait an extra 2 seconds, right? And like in real time, it didn't look like she got it off, but in the case that she did get it off in time and it went in, you're like, whoa. Yeah, that was kind of odd. But nevertheless, Vegas does win that series. But we did see Seattle show that, hey, this team is not unbeatable as they had looked like for this last month or so. They had won 17 straight games, 16 in the regular season. Of course, that Game 1 win, 102-77 against Seattle. And they look like, man, nobody except Minnesota really has a real chance to stop this team. But then Seattle comes back and wins Game 2 and was this close to sending the Aces home, right? The Aces, I don't know when the last time it's been since they lost in the first round. It's been a while. I think it might go back to like 2019 even, since they've lost in the first round, right? Each and every year, at the very least, they've been able to make this second round, this Final Four. And they still have done it again, once again in 2025. And, of course, Asia Wilson was the story of that game last night. 38 points in a Game 3, in a game that was much different from the Fever Dream game where, especially on the Aces in particular, points were not easy to come by. She scored 38 of their 74 points, right? Points were not easy to come by, but the best player in the world did best player in the world things. And I think that was all the difference, right? As good as Erica Wheeler looked at moments in that game, Skylar Diggins in the fourth quarter played really well. Nneka Ogwumike, of course, always been solid. As good as they all look for Seattle, it really did come down to Asia. And, of course, like I said, to Jackie Young in that putback, because Asia did miss a shot that would have ultimately given Vegas the lead, but it missed, and Jackie Young got the rebound and put it back in. So Shout out to Jackie. Shout out to Asia Wilson. And the Aces for advancing to the second round. So game one will be Sunday at 3 o'clock in Vegas. And that's the other thing. The Fever were this close to hosting a playoff series for the first time in a while, right? Because if Seattle had won, the Fever are a higher seed, they would have hosted this second round series. But instead, it will indeed be hosted by the Aces. The first two games will be in Vegas. Game 3 will be in Indiana. Game 4, if necessary, would also be in Indiana. And then Game 5, if necessary, would be back in Vegas. Once again, when you look at the season series here, it is hard to really go back and say, this is the way we think these are going to trend now. Because in the season series, the Fever won the season series 2-1, but both these teams are so different from what we saw in that series. Of course, the Fever have gone through all their injuries. Caitlin Clark actually played in the first game of that season series. That was an Indiana loss, 89-81 in Vegas. Then the Fever won 2 more games back at home. But both teams are different, right? After the third game, these two teams played on July 24th, where the Fever won. After that game, the Aces were 12-12. They go on to win 18 of their next 20 in the regular season, 19 of 21 when you count that first game against Seattle. And they've made changes. First of all, Cheyenne Parker-Tice is back. Good to see her back. She finished out the regular season with them and was playing in the playoffs after giving birth in early July. Jewel Lloyd has been moved to the bench after they kind of had her starting and wanted her to play maybe a larger role to start the season. But these are different teams. You know, Sophie Cunningham, I think, played in all 3 of those games that these teams played in the regular season. Erin McDonald played in a few. Sydney Colston. Those players were all kind of in and out of the lineup during those games. And so it's hard to take away from what we saw in that season series. But the Fever did prove that they could beat the Aces twice in 3 games. But once again, even looking at Alyssa Smith coming back to play the Fever, that'll be an interesting storyline. She wasn't with Vegas at the beginning of this season series, and now she's played a pretty huge part in what they've done. Alyssa Smith played on that kind of opposite block of Asia Wilson. They've kind of filled in each other's spots and roles on the court pretty well. So to me, I don't know if you can take anything or much of anything that we saw in the regular season away from these games. And that could be a good thing, right? I think it might have ended up being a good thing for Indiana because in the Atlanta series, that is, because Carl Smesco is such a preparer. He's such a thinker, right? He thinks about, okay, this is how this went and this is how we can play this. And I don't really think he had the full remedy for what to do against this Fever team because he hadn't really seen it throughout much of the regular season with the Dream. Right? I think Becky Hammond stylistically is a little bit of a different coach than Smesco is. I feel like Becky Hammond is somebody who is more of a reactor than Smesco is, right? Smesco is big into analytics and, okay, if we do this many, if we shoot this many threes, if we shoot this many layups, this will happen. And it's more of a rigid game plan versus what Becky Hammond. I feel like she coaches more in the flow of the game. And there are pros and cons to both of those strategies. Don't get me wrong. But I think she is a different coach in that regard. But to me, it all starts with the number one question. Who guards Asia Wilson? How do they guard Asia Wilson? Those are the questions. In the Fever front court, you have Aaliyah Boston and Natasha Howard. Aaliyah Boston is a stronger player. She's guarding centers more, and Asia Wilson is playing mainly center this year. But Natasha Howard is a quicker player and a longer player. And so it's like, how do you go about this? Natasha Howard obviously has the playoff experience. Shout out to her. It was really emotional watching Natasha Howard and Kelsey Mitchell speak about Stephanie White post-game yesterday. I watched that over YouTube, and it was just like, Kelsey had talked about how no coach had really poured into her as much as Stephanie White had, and Natasha Howard was just talking about how grateful she was to be back in Indiana and playing for this team after she was on those teams 10 years ago. That last won a playoff series for the Fever. And when the Fever went to the finals and lost in Game 5 to Minnesota, Natasha Howard, second year in the W at the time, was on those teams. So she's been through it with this same organization and now with this same head coach. Now she's back, and I got to give a shout out to her as well, because when the Fever made that acquisition, I was a little iffy on it, to be honest, but I think a role and situation definitely played a large factor in that. I was kind of questioning how efficient she could be, right, at this age, and if she still had those same defensive intangibles. But the difference defensively from, and not to throw shots, but from Natasha Howard being the 4 this year versus the Aces' own Alyssa Smith being the 4 last year is night and day, I would say. And the Aces get away with it because they have Asia Wilson, who was just voted co-defensive player of the year with Atlanta Smith. So shout out to both of them, right? And I think Aaliyah Boston is a good defender, but she's not Asia Wilson in that regard. So Asia Wilson makes up for that a lot of the times at that 5 position for the Aces in a way that Aaliyah Boston wasn't. But Natasha Howard, two-way player, just filling in the gaps on offense as well. Her role has been minimized this year from what it was these last couple of years in Dallas. And I think you've seen the difference there. Or even what it was back when she was in New York before the Liberty acquired Stewie and Jonquil Jones, right? It was kind of like, hey, can you be our 1A, 1B with Sabrina Ionescu? And at this point in her career, I don't think Natasha Howard is that. Last year in Dallas, it was her and Arike. It was like, hey, 1A, 1B. Or I guess just the number 2, right? Arike was definitely the number 1 there. But it just wasn't a situation that was fit for her. Now you have 2 all-star scorers in Kelsey Mitchell, in Aaliyah Boston. And they're just like, and of course, when they had Caitlin Clark, she was in the lineup as well. And it's just been more asking Natasha Howard to fill in the gaps offensively, which she's done well. And then defensively, again, she's been very impressive. So I don't know. I think I would start by putting Natasha Howard on Asia Wilson and leaving Aaliyah Boston to kind of roam off of Nalissa Smith. That's what I would do. Maybe try to front some of those Wilson post-ups and try to disrupt her, make those catchers higher out when she catches it kind of at the nail area in the center of the lane. And I wonder if we see Bree Turner on her at all to front and to kind of make things hard on the catch. Turner, not as long or tall as those other two, so I'm not sure how often we see that. But for me, I would put Natasha Howard on her to start, see how that goes, and you can mix it up still. And what I'm curious to see with the Fever in this series is, does Stephanie White decide to send 2 or 3 bodies at Asia Wilson? Because Seattle, they didn't really do that much. And they kind of lived with the results with it. They have different defenders, I would say, than the Fever do. They put their centers, Dominique Malunga, the 19-year-old who played pretty well. They put her on Asia Wilson a lot, and Ezzy Magbagor. Those were the 2 players who they kind of asked to guard Asia Wilson quite a bit in this first round series. Both of those players are kind of longer, and especially Malunga, she's 6'7", right? She's so tough to get around. But even Ezzy is a freak of nature as an athlete as well. I don't know if I would describe either Aaliyah Boston or Natasha Howard in that way as far as physically. And even still, those 2 players still struggled guarding Asia Wilson. So it's not like it was like a successful strategy necessarily, right? Asia Wilson still went off. But I think the strategy from Noelle Quinn and Seattle's perspective was, hey, let's just guard her single coverage and trust that the rest of this offense won't be able to hurt us if they're being guarded in single coverage as well. And offense was not the issue in that final game, that game 3, once again. Just 74 points for the Aces in that game. It came down to the very last play, and Jackie Young made a play, and great on her. But I'm not saying that was a poor strategy from Seattle. I'm just saying that with Indiana's personnel and what Stephanie White has available to her, I would not be surprised to see something different. I'm curious to see how the Fever guard up top as well. I think you put Lexi Hull on Jackie Young and see if the fact that Hull's just a little bit taller and longer can disrupt her. But I could also see them putting somebody like Sims on her as well up top, and then having Lexi Hull guard Chelsea Gray. I guess it just depends on maybe how Stephanie White sees it, which player is more important to the Aces offense, whether it's Chelsea Gray and that ability to hit shots in the mid-range and, of course, the facilitating ability that she has, or whether it is still just because Jackie Young is the better scorer of the 2, whether you just want Lexi Hull to be kind of harassing Jackie Young, and to see if that goes well enough for the Fevers where they can kind of limit what Jackie Young can do, right? So that's a decision that I think will be up to this coaching staff. And again, we even saw it in this Atlanta series. Atlanta has 3 perimeter scorers who can kind of go off at any moment. Jordan Canada, I would say, is the least dangerous of the 3 as a scorer. But, of course, we already know Alisha Gray. She's going to be, I believe, first-team All-W this year. Ryan Howard, multiple-time All-Star. And so Lexi Hull kind of took turns guarding those 2 or 3 players. And so I could see a similar scenario in this series where Lexi Hull is just taking turns. Sometimes she is on Jackie Young. Sometimes she is on Chelsea Gray, right? Sometimes she's on Jewel Lloyd. Once again, she's still playing, right? She's just coming off the bench. And so I don't know how the Fever plan to really guard Lloyd coming off the bench. And, of course, she can be such an X factor because we know with Jewel Lloyd, she's getting her shots up. And when they're falling, it's great. But when they're not, things kind of tend to go sour, as we saw early on in the season when Vegas was struggling to win games. And that's why they kind of made her that sixth woman off the bench rather than just putting her in the starting lineup because she's been a multiple-time All-Star, right? They didn't feel the need to force her in that starting lineup anymore. And it changed things around a lot for this Vegas team. All right. I got to get to my prediction here. Here's what I'll say. This Fever team continues to prove me wrong. I didn't know for sure when all these injuries were happening if they would even make the playoffs. And I did not think they would beat the Dream. I didn't even think they would win a game. Once again, that is documented. You guys can go find that video, that audio. Me and Tony East talked last week. I did not think the Fever would win a game. They've earned my respect, for sure. I don't think they get swept in this series. Me and Tony talked about the potential of Vegas sweeping their way to the finals. Clearly, they haven't done that, right? And they won't do that. But I still think this team that has won 2 championships in 2022 and 2023, this team that came in to the playoffs on a 16-game win streak, number 2 seed in the league, wins this series. And I think they win it in 4 games. Like the Fever will win game 2 or 3, one of those middle 2 games. But I feel like the Aces are the better team. I just think they will advance to the finals in 4 games. And those can be a close 4 games. When it comes down to it, one team is going to have A'ja Wilson. And as well as Kelsey Mitchell has played, she's not A'ja Wilson. And I feel like that'll be the difference. If Seattle would have won, I honestly would have considered picking the Fever to make the finals, which it sounds ridiculous. And part of it is just the way the bracket worked out as well, which sounds ridiculous. I would have considered picking Indiana to make the finals. Once again, they would have had home court advantage in that series against the Storm. And I don't think I would have felt bad for picking the Fever to win in 5 and to win a game 5 at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, right at Meridian, week. But because Vegas was just able to pull it out, because this team has won multiple championships under Becky Hammond and with this kind of core 3, I would say, of Gray, Young, and Wilson, I feel like they will get back to the finals. Now, I picked them to win the finals last week when me and Tony talked. I'm not sure if I feel as confident about that after what we saw this week. Maybe picking my pick, changing my pick to Minnesota after that. But I do think Las Vegas does indeed make the finals again, beating the Fever in 4. But once again, this Fever team has continually made me look like a fool for my predictions in the way I've thought they could do things. So I wouldn't put it past Stephanie White and this crew to at least in this to 5. And once again, in game 5 like that, you never know what can happen. Maybe you get another Odyssey Sims game. Maybe it's the Lexi Hole 5 or 6 threes game that you get in that contest, right? You never know what can happen. The Fever have already proven they can win one of these do or tie games on the road. And, the Aces last night also proved they can win one of these do or die games at home, right, in Vegas. So who knows what happens here? Decided to get a 5-game series. I kind of wish the first round was 5 games just because of how entertaining these games were. But on the other side of it, you can say, look, those games were so tight and so tense because it was a best of 3, right? Because those teams knew they were going home if they didn't win. So there's 2 ways to look at that. I'll be curious to see as the WNBA expands in teams, and of course it continues to expand its schedule with this next CBA, how they maybe change the playoff format as far as how long the series goes. Once again, this format is new this year. In the past, it was first round was best of 3, second round and the finals were best of 5. This year, it goes best of 3, best of 5, and now the finals for the first time ever will be a best of 7. So who knows how the W continues to alter the format and change things around. But nevertheless, it was a very exciting first round. And it's not over, by the way. Tonight, the Liberty play the Mercury in Phoenix. I predicted that this series would go to 3. And I got to stick with my prediction. I think New York goes in there on the road and beats Phoenix to clinch that 4th spot in the semifinals. The winner of that, of course, will play Minnesota. And we'll have to be going to Minnesota on Sunday evening in that game. And I'm going to stick with my prediction there. I just think that team, Stewie Jonquel, I know it hasn't looked as good as it should look this year. I still think they get the job done. But once again, shout out to the Fever. What a win it was to win this series against the Dream. And I'm excited for this Vegas series. Once again, I want to see the matchup with A'ja Wilson. I just want to see how these basically 2 new teams from the last time we saw them play on July 24th. I want to see how they look in this series. Well, this has been another edition of Right Up Meridian on the Back Home Network. Back Home Network, full of great podcasts right now. Crimson Cast, of course, football weather with Galen Clavio and Matt Blaska. Sideline stories. I saw they just did an IU alum event up in Chicago with that Sideline Stories podcast. Sydney Paris, Trisha Whitaker. Go check that out. They also have a recent interview with IU AD Scott Dolson, the Big Red Carpet podcast with Rhett Lewis that is ultra specific to Indiana football and much, much more on the Back Home Network. Next week, Scott will be back with me, and we will be discussing a little bit of Pacers ahead of their season and training camp starting here soon. And then I'll expect to try to get another Fever episode up as well, mid-series, or if it is somehow a sweep, it would probably be post-series. But I'll try to get another Fever episode up here quickly, talking about my thoughts from the beginning of that series. But thank you for listening to yet another episode of Right Up Meridian.